11 years walking those concrete corridors, and I thought I'd seen every corner of Millfield Correctional. But when Warden Hayes started making those 3 a.m. visits to the isolation wing, alone, no logs, no backup, I knew something was wrong. Why would a man who never worked nights suddenly appear in the most secure part of the prison when every camera mysteriously went dark? My name is Joel Radcliffe, and after 11 years as a corrections officer, I'd earned the right to walk away, clean. One more week until retirement. One more week until I could leave this place behind forever and start fresh with my wife Hannah in Arizona. But that night, as I watched Warden Nathan Cole's silhouette disappear around the corner toward the isolation wing, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a knife, I realized some secrets don't let you walk away. The next morning hit me like cold concrete. I'd barely slept replaying that image of Cole disappearing into the isolation wing's shadows. Over coffee in the break room, I pulled up the transfer logs on my tablet, scrolling through routine paperwork that should have been straightforward. Marcus Williams, transferred February 15th, no destination listed. Antonio Reeves, transferred March 3rd, same thing. No receiving facility, no transport manifest. James Bulldog Morrison, transferred March 20th. The pattern was there, staring me in the face like a neon sign. You look like hell, Radcliffe. I glanced up to find Emily Carver pouring herself coffee, her blonde hair pulled back in the regulation ponytail that somehow always looked perfect, even after a 12-hour shift. Emily had been working the isolation wing for 3 years, longer than anyone else currently assigned there. Just thinking about retirement, I said, closing the tablet. Hey, you remember those 3 transfers from solitary last month? Her hand paused mid-pour. Which ones? Williams, Reeves, Morrison. All from your block. Emily set down the coffee pot with deliberate care. Yeah, I remember. Weird thing, though. I never saw any transport vans. Usually they park right outside the west entrance where I can see from the guard station. The coffee suddenly tasted like metal in my mouth. What do you mean you never saw them? I was on duty for all 3 transfers. Williams went first, middle of my shift. The paperwork said transport at 2 a.m., but I never saw headlights. Never. Heard engines, same with the other 2. She lowered her voice. Joel, I've been doing this job for 8 years. Transport vans make noise. They have procedures. But these guys just vanished. I pulled the isolation wing logbook from the filing cabinet, the thick leather-bound record that documented every movement in and out of solitary confinement. My finger traced down the dates, looking for the entries that should have been there. February 15th showed an ink stain where Williams's transfer should have been logged. March 3rd had a whiteout mark covering Reeves's entry. Morrison's transfer on March 20th was written in different handwriting entirely. The ink a slightly different shade. Of blue! Emily, look at this! She leaned over my shoulder, and I caught the scent of her vanilla shampoo mixed with the institutional disinfectant that clung to everything in this place. Her finger traced the same marks I'd noticed. That's not right, she whispered. I write. All the entries for isolation wing transfers. That's not my handwriting on Morrison's entry. The break room felt suddenly smaller, the fluorescent lights too bright. I closed the logbook and looked at Emily's worried face reflected in the glass partition that separated us from the main corridor. Who else has access to these logs? Shift supervisors and the warden. Her voice was barely audible. Joel, what are you thinking? Before I could answer, the break room door opened and Warden Cole stepped inside, his pressed uniform immaculate despite the early hour. His pale blue eyes fixed on the logbook in my hands. Morning, Radcliffe. Carver. His voice was friendly enough, but something in his tone made my skin crawl. Catching up on paperwork before you retire? I forced a smile, just making sure everything's in order for whoever takes over my duties. Cole nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the closed logbook. Good man. We wouldn't want any irregularities in the records. The way he said irregularities made it sound like a threat. That afternoon, I found myself in the maintenance office, studying blueprint after blueprint of Millfield's layout. As a senior guard, I had access to the structural plans, something most officers never bothered with. But 11 years of walking these halls had taught me that sometimes the most important things were hidden in plain sight. The isolation wing blueprints showed a standard layout: 12 cells, guard station, medical observation room, and the main corridor connecting to the general population blocks. Clean, symmetrical, accounted for. But when I overlaid the building's foundation blueprint underneath, something didn't match. There was extra space, a significant gap between the isolation wing's basement and the main prison's lower level. According to the foundation plans, there should have been a utility tunnel running directly beneath the isolation wing. But it wasn't marked on any of the operational blueprints. I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the basement maintenance tunnels. The air down there tasted like rust and old concrete, thick enough to coat my lungs. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping condensation that had stained the walls with dark streaks over the decades. Following the foundation blueprint in my head, I traced the tunnel that should have connected to the isolation wing's basement. The corridor was narrower than the others, and I had to duck to avoid low-hanging ductwork. After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened into a wider section, and there it was. A steel door set into the concrete wall, painted the same institutional gray as everything else in this place. But this door wasn't on any blueprint I'd ever seen. No window, no number, just a card reader and a small sign. Authorized personnel only. I pressed my ear against the cold metal. From somewhere beyond the door came the hum of ventilation systems, working harder than they should have been in an unused space. And underneath that mechanical noise, something else, the faint but unmistakable smell of industrial disinfectant, the kind they used in the medical wing. My security keycard had level 3 access, enough to open most doors in the facility. I slid it through the reader and waited. The light flashed red. Access denied. I tried again, slower this time. Red light. Denied. Level 3 access should have opened everything except the warden's office and the armory. But this door required something higher, something I'd never seen before. The ventilation sounds grew louder as I stood there, and I realized the air being pushed through whatever system was running beyond this door was different from the rest of the prison's circulation. It was cleaner, more sterile, like the air in an operating room. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. I photographed the door with my personal cell phone, making sure to capture the card reader and the authorization sign. The flash reflected off the metal surface, momentarily blinding me in the tunnel's darkness. As I made my way back through the maintenance corridors, my mind raced with possibilities. An unauthorized room in the isolation wing's basement, requiring security clearance higher than my level 3 access. The smell of medical-grade disinfectant. 3 missing inmates whose transfers had no paper trail. I emerged from the basement. Tunnels into the main prison. The normal sounds of institutional life. Guards talking, radios crackling, doors slamming, seeming strange after the underground silence. But as I walked toward the guard station to clock out, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Warden Cole was standing at the far end of the corridor, talking quietly into his cell phone. But he wasn't looking at whoever he was talking to. He was looking directly at me, and in his other hand, he held what looked like a tablet displaying security camera footage of the basement tunnels. I kept walking, forcing my pace to stay normal, casual, just another guard finishing his shift. But I could feel Cole's eyes on me until I turned the corner toward the exit. As I pushed through the heavy doors leading to the parking lot, one thought hammered in my head. If there were cameras in those basement tunnels, cameras that weren't on the official security grid, then someone had been watching me discover that unmarked door. Someone knew I'd found their secret. The drive home felt longer than usual, every red light giving me more time to think about what I'd discovered. By the time I pulled into our driveway in the suburban neighborhood we'd called home for the past 5 years, the sun was setting behind. The Arizona-bound moving truck we'd rented for next week. Hannah was on the porch, her dark hair catching the last light as she taped up another box marked Kitchen Fragile. She looked up when I got out of the car, and her smile was everything good about the life we were building together. "How was your second-to-last shift?" she asked, setting down the packing tape to give me a kiss that tasted like the vanilla lip balm she'd worn since college. "Uneventful," I lied, pulling her closer. "Just tying up loose ends. I can't believe we're really doing this." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. 4 more days, and we're free. No more concrete walls, no more night shifts. Just you, me, and that little house in Tucson with the garden you promised to help me plant. I looked at her face, so full of hope and trust, and felt something twist in my stomach. Hannah had supported me through 11 years of a job that most people couldn't understand. She'd waited up on late shifts, worried through lockdowns, and never once complained about the nightmares that sometimes woke me at 3 a.m. She deserved the quiet retirement we'd planned, but she also deserved the truth. "Hannah, what would you say if..." My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and felt the world shift. Unknown number. No message, just a photo. A photo of Hannah on the porch, taken from across the street. Taken moments ago. I looked up quickly, scanning the neighborhood. Parked cars lined both sides of our street, but none of them seemed occupied. Windows in nearby houses reflected the sunset, making it impossible to see inside. Joel, you look pale. What is it? I couldn't show her the photo. Couldn't explain why someone had been watching our house. Instead, I forced another smile and slipped the phone into my pocket. Nothing, just work stuff. You know how it is. But Hannah knew me too well. Her expression shifted from excitement to concern. Joel, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Before I could answer, another text arrived. This time there was a message. Stop looking or join them. My hand started shaking. I tried to hide it by picking up one of the moving boxes, but Hannah caught my wrist. Your hands are trembling. Her voice was quiet, the way it got when she was really worried. Joel, talk to me. I looked into her brown eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me with love and trust for 15 years, and realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could tell her everything. About the missing inmates, the unmarked door, the basement facility that shouldn't exist. I could explain that someone was threatening us, that our carefully planned retirement might be in danger, or I could protect her by staying quiet and walking away from whatever was happening at Millfield. It's just pre-retirement jitters, I said finally. You know, leaving a place after 11 years. It's harder than I expected. She studied my face for a long moment, and I could see her deciding whether to push for the truth or let me have this lie. Finally, she nodded and released my wrist. 4 more days, she said softly. Then we never have to think about that place again. As we carried boxes into the house together, I kept checking my phone, expecting another message, another threat. But the screen stayed dark. Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening quiet, porch lights beginning to flicker on as families gathered for dinner. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere in the gathering darkness, someone was making plans for what would happen if I didn't heed their warning. Later that night, as Hannah slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and made my choice. I had 4 days left at Millfield Correctional. 4 days to decide whether to walk away clean or dig deeper into secrets that someone was willing to kill to protect. The smart choice was obvious. Take the retirement, protect Hannah, start fresh in Arizona. But the faces of those 3 missing inmates, Williams, Reeves, Morrison, kept appearing in the darkness above my bed. And I knew that walking away meant abandoning whatever had happened to them in that basement facility behind the unmarked door. I also knew that some secrets don't let you walk away. The next morning brought a new horror disguised as routine. During cell checks in the isolation wing, I encountered Derek Vaughn, recently returned from what the paperwork called medical leave. But the man sitting motionless on his narrow cot bore little resemblance to the violent inmate who'd been transferred out 6 weeks ago. Derek had been a fighter, the kind of lifer who'd earned his reputation through brutal efficiency. 3 murder convictions, countless assaults on guards and inmates alike. He'd been in solitary for attacking another prisoner with a sharpened toothbrush handle, and the Derek Vaughn I remembered had eyes like winter, always calculating the next move. The man staring at nothing through the cell window was something else entirely. Vaughn, I called through the food slot. Morning count. No response. He sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, gaze fixed on the blank concrete wall across from his bed. His dark hair had been shaved close to his scalp, revealing something that made my breath catch. Surgical scars. Fresh ones, barely healed, running in precise lines along his hairline. Derek, you need to acknowledge count, I said louder. Still nothing. I opened the observation slot wider and studied his profile. The scars were professional work, clean incisions, expert suturing, but they curved around his skull in patterns that made no medical sense for any procedure I could think of. He doesn't respond to verbal commands anymore. I turned to find Dr. Sarah Whitcomb approaching with a medical card, her usually confident demeanor replaced by something that looked like guilt. Sarah had been Millfield's primary physician for 7 years, a competent professional who'd always been straight with the guards about inmate medical issues. What happened to him? I asked. Emergency brain surgery. Her words came too fast, rehearsed. Subdural hematoma from an altercation with another inmate. We had to relieve pressure on the brain tissue. I looked back at Derek's motionless form. When? He was transferred out 6 weeks ago for dental work. Sarah's hand tightened on the medical cart's handle. The dental issue became complicated. Infection spread. Required neurosurgical intervention. At which facility? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Sarah's face went pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was handled at the state medical facility, in Springfield. Springfield was 4 hours away. I'd been to the state medical facility there twice to transport inmates for specialized care. They had excellent neurosurgical capabilities, but they also had strict protocols for documenting brain surgery on inmates. Can I see the medical records for my incident report? The records are still being processed. Sarah was backing away from me now, the medical cart rolling between us like a barrier. It's complicated paperwork when multiple facilities are involved. I watched Derek through the observation slot again. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't acknowledged our conversation in any way. But as I studied his face, I noticed something else, a small puncture mark behind his right ear, partially hidden by the surgical scars. Dr. Whitcomb, what's that mark behind his ear? Sarah stopped retreating. Mark, looks like an injection site, probably from the IV during surgery. Multiple access points are sometimes necessary for complex procedures, but I'd seen enough medical procedures to know the difference between an IV site and something else. This mark was precise, circular, like it had been made by a very thin needle, and it was in exactly the wrong place for any surgical IV I'd ever seen. Sarah, how long have you been Millfield's physician? 7 years. Why? In 7 years, how many inmates have you seen come back from brain surgery? She hesitated too long before answering. It's not common. Derek makes 3 in the past 2 months. Her face went white. 3? Marcus Williams came back from medical leave in February. Catatonic, just like Derek. Antonio Reeves in March, same condition. Now Derek. Sarah's hands were shaking now, the medical cart rattling slightly as she gripped it. I can't discuss other patients' medical information. All 3 had the same surgical scars. All 3 came back as vegetables. That's not... You don't understand the complexity of... Where are Williams and Reeves now, Sarah? The question hit her like a physical blow. She stepped back against the corridor wall, her professional composure cracking completely. They were transferred, she whispered. Where? I don't know. The words came out broken, desperate. Joel, I swear to God, I don't know where they took them. The way she said they made ice form in my veins. Not we transferred them or the state moved them. They took them. Before I could ask another question, footsteps echoed from the main corridor. Heavy, measured steps that belonged to someone in authority. Sarah's eyes went wide with panic. Don't ask me about this again, she whispered urgently. Please, Joel, for your own good. Warden Cole appeared around the corner, his uniform pressed and perfect despite the early hour. He nodded to both of us with that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Dr. Whitcomb Radcliffe, how's our patient this morning? Sarah straightened, some of her professional mask sliding back into place. Stable. Still showing effects of the recent surgery, but vital signs are good. Cole peered through the observation slot at Derek's motionless form. Good to have him back with us. Nothing like familiar surroundings for recovery. Something in his tone made my skin crawl, as if Derek's condition was exactly what Cole had expected. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going home after my shift, I parked my car in the employee lot and slipped back into the prison through the maintenance entrance, the guard tower overlooking the isolation. Wing was supposed to be unmanned during night shifts. Budget cuts had eliminated the overnight watch position 2 years ago, but it still had power, and it still had the high-powered binoculars used for perimeter surveillance. I climbed the narrow, metal stairs to the tower, each step echoing in the darkness despite my efforts to stay quiet. The observation deck was small, cramped, designed for one person to monitor the prison yard and surrounding fence line. Through the reinforced windows, I had a perfect view of the isolation wing's exterior. At 2:47 a.m., exactly like clockwork, I saw movement. Warden Cole emerged from a side entrance I'd never noticed before, flanked by 2 men in civilian clothes. They weren't guards. I knew every officer on staff, and these men moved with a different kind of purpose. One carried what looked like a medical bag, the other wheeled a covered gurney. Through the binoculars, I watched them approach the isolation wing's basement entrance. Cole used a key card. different from his regular access card. This one was black instead of the standard blue. The men waited while Cole disabled something on the doorframe, probably an alarm system that wasn't connected to the main security grid. They disappeared inside at 2:52 a.m. I settled in to wait, my hands cramping around the binoculars as I kept watch. The night was dead quiet except for the distant hum of the prison's ventilation systems and the occasional radio chatter from the guards on regular patrol. At 3:39 a.m. they emerged. The gurney was no longer covered, and it was no longer empty. Even through the binoculars, even in the dim light cast by the security floods, I could see the shape strapped to the gurney was human, male, pale, wearing prison-issue clothing. The figure was completely motionless, head covered by what looked like a surgical cap. But what made my blood freeze was the IV line running from the figure's arm to a bag of clear fluid held by one of the civilian men. Whatever was in that bag was being pumped into the person on the gurney as they wheeled him toward a van I hadn't noticed before. A white medical transport vehicle parked in the shadows beyond the security lights. Cole walked alongside the gurney, checking his watch with the casual efficiency of someone following a well-practiced routine. As they reached the van, he said something to the civilian with the medical bag. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the man nod and make a note on a clipboard. They loaded the gurney into the van with practiced efficiency. No urgency, no rush, just the methodical movements of people who'd done this many times before. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. At 3:44 a.m., the van pulled away into the night, its headlights off until it reached the main road. Cole and the remaining civilian disappeared back into the isolation wing basement. I stayed in the tower until sunrise, but Cole never emerged again. When the morning shift guards began arriving at 6 a.m., I slipped out the way I'd come, my mind racing with what I'd witnessed. Someone had been taken from the isolation wing basement. Someone alive, judging by the IV line. But who? And where were they being transported at nearly 4 a.m. in an unmarked medical van? As I drove home through the early morning traffic, one detail kept haunting me. The figure on the gurney had been too still, too compliant. Just like Derek Vaughn sitting motionless in his cell, staring at nothing. Just like someone who'd had their brain surgically altered to ensure cooperation. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for several minutes, watching Hannah move around inside our kitchen, probably making coffee and planning another day of packing. She looked so normal, so safe, framed by the warm light of our home. But I knew that after what I'd seen tonight, normal was an illusion we could no longer afford. I couldn't wait any longer. The next morning, I cornered Dr. Whitcomb in her office during the medical round shift change. She was alone, updating patient files on her computer, and when I knocked on her doorframe, she jumped like I'd fired a gun. "Joel, I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk about Derek Vaughn, and Marcus Williams, and Antonio Reeves." Her face went pale. "I told you I can't discuss." "I saw them last night, Sarah." I stepped into her office and closed the door behind me. At 2:47 a.m., I watched Warden Cole and 2 civilians take someone out of the isolation wing basement on a gurney. Someone alive, with an IV line. The color drained completely from her face. She stood up from her desk so quickly that her chair rolled backward into the wall. You shouldn't have." She was hyperventilating now, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of her desk. I moved closer, keeping my voice low. "Sarah, what are they doing to these inmates?" "I can't tell you." Tears were forming in her eyes. "Joel, you don't understand what you're asking." "Then help me understand." She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her internal struggle playing out across her face. Finally, she walked to her filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder marked with codes I didn't recognize. "These are medical files that don't officially exist," she whispered. "Inmates who were brought to me for consultation before their transfers." She opened the folder and spread the contents across her desk. Medical charts, brain scans, psychological evaluations, surgical notes. The names were there: Marcus Williams, Antonio Reeves, Derek Vaughn, and others I didn't recognize. "Experimental neurosurgery," she said, her voice barely audible. "They call it behavioral modification therapy. The company pays the prison system for access to inmates who meet specific criteria." "What criteria?" "Violent offenders with life sentences, no family, no appeals pending, no outside advocacy, men who won't be missed if something goes wrong." I studied the brain scans spread across her desk. Even with my limited medical knowledge, I could see the differences between before and after images. Areas that should have shown activity were dark, dead. They're lobotomizing them. It's more sophisticated than that. Sarah's voice was hollow, defeated. They're targeting specific regions of the brain that control aggression, resistance, independent thought. The goal is to create compliant subjects for further research. Further research into what? Pain tolerance, drug resistance, biological weapons testing. She was crying now, tears dropping onto the medical files. They're using these men as lab rats, Joel. And I've been helping them. Why? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. They have my daughter. The words came out broken, desperate. My ex-husband took Lily to Europe last year, supposedly for vacation, but they never came back. The company found them, and now they have leverage over me. If I don't cooperate, if I don't provide the medical support they need, she couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I looked at the files again, the clinical documentation of horrors being performed in the basement of the prison where I'd worked for 11 years. How many? 17 so far. They started 8 months ago. What happens to them after? The ones who survive the surgery are kept for ongoing experimentation. The ones who don't, she gestured to another section of files. They're listed as died from medical complications during transport. I was about to ask another question when footsteps echoed in the corridor outside her office. Heavy, measured steps that I recognized immediately. Sarah's eyes went wide with terror. He can't find you here with these files. She frantically began stuffing the papers back into the folder, but there were too many, and her hands were shaking too badly. The footsteps stopped directly outside her door. Dr. Whitcomb? Warden Cole's voice was friendly, conversational. Are you available for a consultation? Sarah looked at me with pure panic in her eyes. I pointed to the supply closet in the corner of her office and mouthed, "Hide the files." She nodded and shoved the folder behind a stack of medical supplies just as Cole appeared in the doorway. "Warden Cole," she managed, her voice only slightly strained. "Of course. How can I help you?" Cole's gaze swept the office, taking in every detail. When his eyes met mine, his smile was cold, calculating. "Radcliffe. Working late again, I see. Just checking on an inmate medical issue," I said. "Derek Vaughn's condition." "Ah, yes, poor Derek. Tragic how brain injuries can change a man." Cole stepped fully into the office, and I noticed he was carrying a tablet. "Dr. Whitcomb, I need to discuss the medical transport schedule for this evening. Some adjustments to our usual procedures." The way he said usual procedures made it clear this conversation was about more than standard medical transfers, and the way he was looking at me made it clear that my time was running out. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Warden Cole in his office, the space feeling smaller than usual despite its executive dimensions. His desk was polished oak, covered with the typical administrative detritus of running a major correctional facility. But today there was also a thick manila envelope positioned directly in front of my chair. "Joel, you've been an exemplary employee for 11 years, Cole began, settling back in his leather chair with the ease of a man completely in control. "Your record is spotless. Your dedication to this institution has been noted and appreciated. Thank us. You, sir, which is why this conversation pains me." He leaned forward, his pale blue eyes fixed on mine. "I've become aware that you've been asking questions about certain operational procedures. Procedures that are above your clearance level." I kept my expression neutral, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I'm just trying to tie up loose ends before retirement, make sure whoever takes over my duties has complete information." Cole nodded slowly, then reached for the manila envelope. "That's admirable. But sometimes, Joel, complete information can be dangerous. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss." He slid the envelope across the desk toward me. "Open it." Inside were photographs, high-resolution images taken with telephoto lenses. Me in the basement tunnels, examining the unmarked door. Me in the guard tower with binoculars, watching the isolation wing. Me entering Dr. Whitcomb's office earlier that morning. But the photographs that made my blood freeze were at the bottom of the stack. Hannah at our mailbox. Hannah loading boxes into our car. Hannah at the grocery store, completely unaware she was being watched. Impressive surveillance capabilities, wouldn't you say? Cole's voice was conversational, almost friendly. Technology has come so far in recent years. I forced myself to look up from the photographs. "What do you want?" I want you to have the retirement you deserve. He gestured to a second envelope on his desk, this one thick with what was obviously cash. $50,000, Joel. A bonus for your years of dedicated service. Enough to help you and Hannah start fresh in Arizona, without any financial worries. And in exchange, you forget everything you think you've seen. You complete your final 2 shifts without incident. You retire with honors and full benefits. And you never speak to anyone about the operational procedures you've observed. I stared at the cash-filled envelope, calculating. $50,000 would set us up nicely in Tucson. We could buy the house with the garden Hannah wanted, maybe even take that trip to Europe she'd been dreaming about. All I had to do was walk away from whatever was happening in the basement of Millfield Correctional. What if I refuse? Cole's friendly demeanor didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold and final. Then I'm afraid Hannah's safety becomes a concern. You see, retirement isn't just about leaving a job, Joel. It's about leaving all the responsibilities and protections that job provided. Once you're no longer under Millfield's employment umbrella, well, accidents happen, especially to people who know things they shouldn't. The threat was delivered with the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. Professional, matter-of-fact, completely without emotion. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about consequences. Cole stood up and walked to the window overlooking the prison yard. This facility provides a valuable service, Joel. Not just to the state of Illinois, but to medical research that could benefit millions of people. The work being done here is advancing our understanding of neuroscience, pain management, disease resistance, using unwilling subjects, using inmates who have forfeited their rights to make choices about their lives, men who have committed unspeakable acts of violence, who would otherwise spend decades consuming taxpayer resources while contributing nothing to society. I thought about Derek Vaughn sitting motionless in his cell, staring at nothing with dead eyes. You're talking about human experimentation. I'm talking about giving their lives meaning. Cole turned back to face me. These men are already lost. Joel, we're simply ensuring their existence serves a greater purpose. The cash envelope seemed to pulse on the desk between us like a living thing. $50,000. Hannah's safety. A clean retirement. All I had to do was pretend I'd never seen the unmarked door, never watched them wheel a man out on a gurney, never learned about the 17 inmates who'd been surgically altered for research purposes. I need time to think about it. Cole smiled, but it was the expression of a predator that had already cornered its prey. Of course, take all the time you need. But Joel, I'll need your answer before your shift ends tomorrow. After that, the offer expires. He gestured toward the photograph still spread across his desk. And other arrangements will need to be made. I stood up, leaving both envelopes untouched. As I reached the door, Cole's voice stopped me. Oh, and Joel? I'd strongly advise against discussing this conversation with anyone. Dr. Whitcomb, for instance, is already under tremendous stress about her daughter's situation. It would be unfortunate if additional pressure caused her to make poor choices. The message was clear. Sarah was as trapped as I was. And if I pushed too hard, she'd pay the price along with Hannah. I walked out of Cole's office with the weight of an impossible choice crushing down on my shoulders. In less than 24 hours, I would have to decide between justice and survival. And I was beginning to realize that in this situation, choosing both might not be possible. That evening, Emily Carver found me in the break room, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the institutional furniture that suddenly felt more like a cage than a workplace. "You look like someone walked over your grave," she said, settling into the chair across from me. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced by something I'd never seen before. Fear. "Long day," I managed. "Joel, I need to tell you something about Adam Mercer." The name hit me like cold water. Adam had been Emily's boyfriend, another guard who'd worked the isolation wing. I'd noticed he'd been absent for the past few weeks, but assumed he'd transferred to another facility or quit. What about Adam? Emily's hands were shaking as she pulled a folded envelope from her pocket. He didn't transfer to Springfield like everyone thinks. He disappeared 3 weeks ago, right after he started asking questions about the same things you've been looking into. She slid the envelope across the table. "He gave me this the night before he vanished. Made me promise to give it to someone I trusted if anything happened to him." Inside the envelope were photocopied documents, handwritten notes, and printed emails. Adam's research was extensive, methodical. the work of someone who'd spent weeks documenting patterns and inconsistencies. The first document was a list of inmates from the isolation wing over the past 8 months, with dates, medical, codes, and transfer information. But Adam had added his own annotations in red ink, connecting dots that painted a horrifying picture. "Look at the selection criteria," Emily whispered, pointing to Adam's notes. "All lifers with violent convictions, no family contact in over 2 years, no pending appeals, no advocacy groups monitoring their cases." I scanned the list. Marcus Williams, Antonio Reeves, Derek Vaughn, all there. But there were 14 other names I didn't recognize, all marked with the same red notation. "Selected," Adam figured. Out they were choosing inmates who wouldn't be missed, Emily continued. Men whose disappearance wouldn't trigger investigations or media attention. The next document was a copy of medical requisitions signed by Dr. Whitcomb. Surgical equipment, anesthetics, neurological monitoring devices, orders that had nothing to do with routine prison medical care. "Sarah's been forced to order equipment. For brain surgery," I said, the pieces clicking together. "That's how they've been performing the procedures without outside medical facilities knowing. It gets worse." Emily pulled out a printed email chain. Adam hacked into Cole's computer. "Before he disappeared, look at this." The emails were between Cole and someone identified only as research coordinator. The subject line read, "Behavioral Modification Project, Phase 2 Authorization." I read the exchange with growing horror. RC. Phase 1, results exceeded expectations. Subjects showing 97% compliance rates post-procedure. Ready to expand to larger sample group. Cole. Excellent. How many additional subjects required for Phase 2? RC. Target acquisition. 25 subjects over next 6 months. Same criteria as Phase 1. Company prepared to increase compensation to $75K per viable subject. Cole. Understood. We'll coordinate with medical staff for enhanced screening protocols. $75,000 per inmate, I breathed. They're selling people to a research company that's using them for human experimentation. Emily's voice was barely audible. Adam calculated that Cole has made over $1 million in the past 8 months. I thought about the manila envelope, full of cash sitting on Cole's desk, the $50,000 he'd offered me to stay quiet, blood money from the sale of human beings. "Emily, where do you think Adam is now?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I think he became one of the subjects. I think when Cole realized Adam was getting too close to the truth, he had him processed through the same system as the inmates." The possibility hit me like a physical blow. A guard disappeared and surgically altered to ensure his silence. If they could do that to Adam, they could do it to anyone who threatened their operation. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're asking the same questions Adam was asking. Because in 2 days you're supposed to retire and disappear into Arizona where no one can protect you." She leaned forward, gripping my arm. "And because I found something else." She pulled out the last document, a work schedule for the isolation. My name was highlighted on tomorrow night's shift, marked with a notation I'd never seen before. "Priority processing. Joel, they're not planning to let you retire. Tomorrow night is when they're going to make you disappear." The break room suddenly felt airless, the walls closing in around us. I looked at Emily's terrified face and realized that everything Cole had told me about having a choice was a lie. There was no envelope of cash, no clean retirement, no safe future with Hannah in Arizona. There was only tomorrow night, and whatever they had planned for me in that basement facility behind the unmarked door. "What do we do?" I asked. Emily's expression hardened with determination. "We find Adam, and we get evidence that can't be covered up or explained away." She stood up, gathering the documents. "But Joel, we have less than 18 hours before your priority processing shift begins. After that, it might be too late for all of us." As she walked away, leaving me alone with the cold coffee and the weight of what I'd learned, one thought echoed in my mind. Adam Mercer was somewhere in that basement facility, probably strapped to a surgical table, his mind surgically altered, to ensure his compliance. And tomorrow night, I was scheduled to join him. That night I didn't go home. Instead, I sat in my car in the Millfield parking lot, studying Adam's research by the dome light while rain drummed against the windshield. The selection criteria he documented was chillingly precise. But there was something else, a pattern within the pattern that made my blood run cold. Every inmate selected for the program had one thing in common beyond the obvious criteria. They'd all been involved in incidents that had resulted in guard injuries. Marcus Williams had broken a guard's arm during a cell extraction. Antonio Reeves had thrown boiling water on an officer. Derek Vaughn's toothbrush attack had left a guard with permanent facial scars. But the most disturbing discovery was buried in Adam's handwritten notes. 3 guards had also disappeared over the past 8 months, all listed as transferred to other facilities in the personnel records. All 3 had been asking questions about missing inmates or unusual medical procedures. I pulled out my phone and searched the prison employee database. Guard transfers required paperwork, forwarding addresses, contact information for the receiving facility. But when I looked up the 3 missing guards, their files showed the same gaps as the missing inmates. No destination facility, no forwarding contact information, no paper trail. Just like Adam was going to be listed when his absence became official. Just like I would be listed if I disappeared tomorrow night. I grabbed Adam's research and headed back into the prison through the maintenance entrance. If I was going to find evidence that couldn't be covered up, I needed to access the personnel files and medical records that existed only on the internal network. The administrative offices were dark, but my security badge still granted access to the personnel computer system. I logged in and began cross-referencing the missing guards with medical requisitions, facility expenditures, and unusual overtime payments. What I found made me physically sick. Each missing guard had generated a payment voucher of $75,000, filed under medical research consultation fees, the same amount mentioned in Cole's emails for viable subjects. The prison was being paid the same amount whether they delivered inmates or guards for experimentation. But the most damning evidence was in Cole's personal file directory, a folder labeled personnel considerations that contained psychological profiles, medical records, and assessment reports for current staff members. My own file was there, marked with a red flag and yesterday's date. The assessment noted my investigative tendencies, my approaching retirement timeline, and my potential security risk status. At the bottom, in Cole's handwriting, recommended for priority processing, subject demonstrates ideal physical and psychological parameters for Phase 2 research protocols. I wasn't just a loose end to be tied up. I was a research subject who met their criteria for human experimentation. I printed everything I could find, stuffing the documents into a manila folder that I tucked inside my jacket. But as I prepared to log out of the system, one more file caught my attention. A work schedule for tomorrow night's shift, but not the standard guard rotation. This was a special operations schedule, listing Cole, 2 research technicians, Dr. Whitcomb, and a subject preparation team. My name appeared under primary subject. Emily's name was listed under secondary containment. They weren't just planning to take me tomorrow night. They were planning to take Emily too. Probably because she knew too much about Adam's research. I grabbed my phone and called Emily's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. My hands were shaking as I realized they might have already moved against her. If Emily had been taken, if she was already in that basement facility, then I was completely alone in this fight. But as I sat in the dark administrative office, surrounded by evidence of horrors that had been happening for months under my nose, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to disappear into the night and hope Cole honored his fake bargain. I was going to find Emily and Adam, and I was going to expose this entire operation, even if it meant walking directly into the trap they'd set for me, because some secrets are too dark to survive in the light. At 2:30 a.m., I used Adam's stolen keycard to access the unmarked door in the basement. The card reader's light flashed green, and the heavy steel door swung open with a whisper of pressurized air that smelled like antiseptic and something else. Something organic and wrong. The corridor beyond was nothing like the rest of Millfield's utilitarian architecture. Clean white tiles covered the walls and floor, broken by stainless steel fixtures and fluorescent lights that hummed with the efficiency of an operating room. This wasn't a hastily converted space. It was a purpose-built medical facility hidden beneath the prison. I moved forward carefully, my footsteps muffled by the rubber soles of my work boots. The corridor branched in 2 directions, and I could hear the distant hum of machinery and the soft beeping of medical equipment. I chose the left branch and immediately regretted it. The first room I encountered was lined with surgical instruments, arranged on stainless steel trays with military precision, brain surgery tools, monitoring equipment, restraint devices that looked more like torture implements than medical necessities. But it was the photographs pinned to a bulletin board that made my knees weak, before and after images of the inmates I'd seen. Marcus Williams, smiling in his intake photo, then vacant and drooling after surgery. Antonio Reeves, angry and defiant, then sitting motionless with surgical scars across his scalp. Derek Vaughn, and a dozen others I didn't recognize. And at the bottom of the board, 3 photographs of men in guard uniforms, men I'd worked with, men who'd supposedly transferred to other facilities. Thereafter photos showed the same empty stare, the same surgical scars, the same complete absence of human consciousness. One of them was Adam Mercer. I stared at his photograph, at the man Emily loved reduced to a breathing shell, and felt something, cold and hard, settle in my chest. This wasn't just about money or research. This was about turning human beings into living experiments, erasing everything that made them who they were. A sound from deeper in the facility made me freeze. Voices, muffled by distance and concrete but definitely human. I followed the sound down the right corridor, passing doors marked with medical codes and warning signs about biological hazards. The voices grew clearer as I approached what looked like the main laboratory. Through a small window in the door, I could see movement, 2 figures in surgical scrubs working around an examination table, but it was the third figure that made my heart stop. Adam Mercer was strapped to a surgical table, conscious but completely motionless. His eyes were open, tracking the movement of the technicians around him, but his face showed no emotion, no fear, no recognition, just the blank compliance of someone whose capacity for independent thought had been surgically removed. One of the technicians was adjusting an IV line connected to Adam's arm. The other was preparing what looked like a syringe filled with blue liquid. Neither of them spoke, working with the efficient silence of people following a routine they'd performed many times before. I pulled out my phone and started recording, capturing evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. The video showed Adam's face clearly, the surgical scars, the restraints, the medical equipment being used on him. This was proof of human experimentation, proof that guards were being used as test subjects. But as I was recording, I heard footsteps behind me, in the corridor. I was wondering when you'd make it down here. I spun around to find Warden Cole standing 20 feet away, flanked by 2 men in security uniforms I didn't recognize. He looked relaxed, almost pleased, like a host greeting an expected guest. "Joel, you've been very thorough in your investigation. Much more thorough than Adam was, actually. He only found the financial records. You've discovered the entire operation." I kept my phone recording, holding it low at my side. "How long has this been going on?" 8 months of active operations. "But we've been planning for 2 years. Cole stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back like a professor delivering a lecture. "The company approached us with a proposal that was too lucrative to refuse. Use our isolation wing for medical research and everyone benefits. Everyone except the subjects. The subjects are criminals, Joel. Men who forfeited their rights when they chose violence. We're giving their lives purpose, advancing medical science in ways that could help millions of people." I thought about Derek Vaughn sitting motionless in his cell, about Adam strapped to that table. "You're torturing people. We're conducting research, pain tolerance studies, neurological mapping, pharmaceutical testing, the kind of research that would take decades to approve through conventional channels. And the guards?" Cole's smile grew colder. "Sometimes security requires sacrifice." Adam was asking too many questions, threatening the program. "You've done the same thing. The difference is, Adam's contributions to science are ongoing." The 2 security guards moved closer, and I realized I was trapped between them and the laboratory door. My phone was still recording, but that wouldn't matter if I didn't survive to share the evidence. "What happens now?" "Now you join the program, Joel. Your psychological profile indicates you'd be an excellent subject for our compliance studies. Strong-willed individuals always provide the most interesting data when that will is modified." I looked back through the laboratory window at Adam's motionless form and realized this was how I was going to end up. Strapped to a table, conscious but helpless, my mind surgically altered until nothing remained but biological functions and the ability to follow orders. But as Cole and his men moved closer, I noticed something they'd overlooked. The fire alarm system in this facility was connected to the main prison's emergency protocols, and I still had my guard radio. I smashed the fire alarm with my elbow, and immediately the entire facility erupted in piercing sirens. Red emergency lights began flashing, and automated systems kicked in throughout the underground complex. But more importantly, I knew the alarm would trigger lockdown protocols in the main prison above us. Cole's face twisted with rage. "Shut it off!" "Can't," I shouted over the sirens. "Emergency protocols. The whole system's locked down until the fire department responds." The two security guards lunged for me, but I was already moving. I sprinted down the corridor toward the laboratory, shouldering through the door just as automated systems began sealing the facility. Adam was still strapped to the table, but the technicians had scattered when the alarm started. "Adam," I shook, his shoulder looking into his vacant eyes. "Adam, can you hear me?" No response. His eyes tracked my movement, but there was no recognition, no awareness. Whatever they'd done to his brain had left him responsive to stimuli but incapable of independent thought or communication. The restraints were medical grade, designed to hold struggling patients during surgery. I fumbled with the buckles while the sirens wailed and footsteps pounded in the corridor outside. Adam's body was limp, offering no resistance but no assistance either. "Joel!" Cole's voice echoed from the hallway. "You're only making this worse for yourself." I got one restraint loose when the laboratory door burst open. One of the security guards charged in, but the flashing red lights and disorienting sirens made his movements clumsy. I grabbed a surgical tray and hurled it at him, sending instruments scattering across the floor. "The facility's in lockdown," I yelled, backing toward a second exit I'd spotted. "Emergency responders are coming." "No one's coming." Cole appeared, in the doorway, his calm demeanor cracking. "This facility doesn't officially exist. The fire alarm routes to our internal security team." My heart sank. Of course they'd thought of that. A secret medical facility couldn't rely on external emergency services. But then I remembered something Adam had written in his research notes. Something about the prison's communication systems being connected to state oversight networks for compliance monitoring. I pulled out my guard radio and switched to the emergency frequency that connected directly to the State Corrections Oversight Office. "This is Officer Joel Radcliffe, badge number 4471, requesting immediate assistance at Millfield Correctional. We have discovered an unauthorized medical facility in the isolation wing basement, conducting illegal human experimentation on inmates and staff." Static crackled from the radio, then a voice. "Officer Radcliffe, please repeat your location and nature of emergency." Cole's face went white. "Cut the transmission." I kept talking into the radio while backing toward the exit. "Warden Nathan Cole has been operating an illegal research program. Multiple inmates and guards have been subjected to unauthorized brain surgery. I have evidence of financial compensation from external research companies." "Joel, stop." Cole was shouting now, his professional composure completely gone. "You don't understand what you're destroying." "I understand perfectly." I reached the exit and found it led to a stairway that connected to the main prison's utility levels. "I'm destroying a human trafficking operation disguised as medical research." The radio crackled again. "Officer Radcliffe, state investigators are en route to your location. Maintain your position and continue transmission." I could hear vehicles approaching outside the prison. Real vehicles, not Cole's cover-up team. Through the concrete walls and emergency sirens, the sound of multiple engines, slamming doors, official voices coordinating a response. Cole and his security team were trapped. They couldn't silence me without silencing the state investigators who were now monitoring our conversation. They couldn't destroy the evidence while emergency protocols had the facility locked down. But they could still try to eliminate the witnesses. "Take him down," Cole ordered his men. "Make it look like an accident during the emergency response." I ran for the stairway, clutching the radio and my phone with its recorded evidence. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing, their footsteps echoing in the sterile corridors of their hidden laboratory. As I climbed toward the main prison levels, I thought about Adam strapped to that table, about the 17 inmates who'd been turned into experimental subjects, about Emily who might already be in their custody. The sirens were still wailing, but they sounded different now, not like a trap closing, but like justice finally arriving. I just had to stay alive long enough to see it delivered. At the top of the stairway, I could see the main prison's emergency lights flashing through the reinforced glass. And beyond that, the headlights of what looked like a convoy of state vehicles pulling into the facility's main entrance. Cole and his operation were finished. But as footsteps pounded up the stairs behind me, I realized the most dangerous part was just beginning. I burst through the stairway door into the main prison's utility level, emergency lights casting everything in hellish red shadows. The lockdown protocols had sealed most of the facility, but I knew these corridors better than Cole's security team. 11 years of walking these halls gave me an advantage they couldn't match. The radio in my hand crackled with updates. State investigation team has secured the main entrance. Officer Radcliffe, what is your current position? Utility level, Section C. I panted into the radio while running toward the main communications center. The unauthorized facility is directly beneath the isolation wing. Multiple victims still. In the laboratory. Behind me, I could hear Cole's men spreading out, trying to cut off my escape routes, but they were making a critical mistake. They were trying to contain me instead of escaping themselves. Their desperation was making them tactical. I reached the prison's central communication hub and used my access card to enter. The room was filled with monitoring equipment, radio systems, and most importantly, the digital recording system that captured all official communications within the facility. If I could download the conversations between Cole and the research company, the medical orders, the financial transactions, all of it would be permanently preserved and transmitted to the state oversight network. This is Officer Radcliffe. I spoke into the main communication system. I am uploading digital evidence to the state network regarding the illegal medical facility at Millfield Correctional. I connected my phone to the system and began transferring Adam's research files, the photographs I'd taken, and the video of Adam strapped to the surgical table. The upload bar crawled across the screen as megabytes of damning evidence flowed to servers beyond Cole's reach. "Joel!" Cole's voice echoed from the corridor outside. "This is your last chance. Surrender now, and we can still work something out." I ignored him and continued the upload. Financial records showing payments to Cole, medical requisitions for brain surgery equipment, personnel files marking guards and inmates for processing. The door rattled as someone tried to force entry, but the communication center was designed to be secure during emergencies. Steel reinforced, multiple locks, bulletproof glass. 70% uploaded, I muttered, watching the progress bar. My radio crackled. "Officer Radcliffe, state investigators have encountered resistance at the facility entrance. Warden Cole's security team is attempting to deny access. Cole is trying to destroy evidence," I responded. The facility beneath the isolation wing contains surgical equipment, medical records, and at least one victim still strapped to an examination table. 80%, 90%. The lights in the communication center suddenly went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but I realized Cole had cut main power to try to stop the upload. Too late. The system was running on backup power, with its own dedicated connection to the state network. "Upload complete. Evidence successfully transmitted to State Oversight Network," I announced into the radio. "All files have been preserved and copied to external servers." The door to the communication center exploded inward. Cole and 2 security guards rushed in, but they no longer looked like men in control. They looked like trapped animals. Dangerous and desperate. "You have no idea what you've done," Cole snarled. "The research being conducted here could revolutionize medicine. Pain management, neurological disorders, psychiatric treatment, all of it advanced by decades because of our work. Your work is torture. Our work is necessary." He was shouting now, all pretense of civilized authority gone. "Do you think medical breakthroughs happen through compassion? Do you think the treatments that save millions of lives come from playing by rules written by people who've never made hard choices?" Through the reinforced windows, I could see flashlights moving in the main corridor. State investigators getting closer despite Cole's security team's resistance. "Where's Emily?" I demanded. Cole's expression shifted, and I saw something that looked almost like genuine regret. "She's safe, for now. But if this facility is exposed, if our research is shut down, then everyone involved becomes a liability, including her, including all of us." He pulled a pistol from inside his jacket, and I realized the situation had just become lethal. "Joel, I'm going to offer you one final choice. Help me contain this situation, and Emily lives. Continue resisting, and she becomes part of the cleanup process." The radio in my hand crackled with voices, state investigators coordinating their approach, requests for backup, Orders to secure all personnel. Help was coming. But would it arrive in time to save Emily? What do you want? I asked. I want you to tell the investigators that you discovered evidence of inmate smuggling, not medical research. I want you to claim that the basement facility was being used to hide contraband, not conduct experiments. And if I refuse? Cole's finger moved to the trigger of his pistol. Then you join Adam and the others, permanently. Through the window, I could see state investigators approaching the communication center. They were 30 seconds away. Maybe less. But Emily's life hung in the balance, and I had to make a choice that would determine whether justice or cover-up prevailed. The communication center door burst open before I could answer Cole's ultimatum. 3 state investigators in tactical gear rushed in, weapons drawn, shouting commands that cut through the tension like gunfire. Drop your weapon. Hands where we can see them. Cole's pistol wavered between me and the investigators. For a moment that lasted forever. I could see him calculating odds, weighing options, deciding whether to surrender or fight. He chose neither. You want to know where Emily Carver is? He said, his voice eerily calm despite the guns pointed at him. She's in the basement facility, sedated and prepped for surgery. You have maybe 20 minutes before the procedure becomes irreversible. One of the investigators, a woman with lieutenant's bars, stepped forward. Sir, drop your weapon and step away from the prisoner. I'm not the prisoner here, Cole said. I'm the only one who can save her life. He was using Emily as a human shield, even though she wasn't in the room, threatening her life to create leverage for his escape or to force a cover-up of his operation. The facility is automated, he continued. If I don't input the correct codes every 30 minutes, emergency protocols engage. Medical procedures continue without human oversight. I looked at the investigators, then back at Cole. He's lying. The facility requires constant human supervision for surgeries. Am I? Cole's smile was cold, predatory. Are you willing to bet Emily's life on that assumption? Lieutenant Chen, according to her name tag, kept her weapon trained on Cole while speaking into her radio. This is Chen. We need immediate medical support and a bomb disposal unit. Suspect claims automated medical procedures are in progress. No bomb, Cole said. Just surgery. Brain surgery on a healthy young woman who asked too many questions. Hands clenched into fists. Every second we spent negotiating with Cole was time Emily might not have. But if he was telling the truth about automated procedures, rushing in without the proper codes could kill her. What do you want? Lieutenant Chen asked. Safe passage, a vehicle to the county airport, and a guarantee that this investigation ends. Here. That's not going to happen. Cole's finger tightened on the trigger. Then Emily Carver dies on a surgical table, and her blood is on your hands. I stepped forward, ignoring the investigators' weapons. Cole, let me go down there. Let me input your codes and stop whatever procedure you've started. So you can gather more evidence? I don't think so. So I can save Emily's life. I looked directly into his eyes. You can kill me afterward if you want, but let me try to save her first. For a moment, Cole's expression wavered. I could see him struggling with the reality that his operation was finished, that all his research and profits were about to disappear. But I could also see something else. A flicker of the man who'd once been a legitimate corrections professional, before money and power had corrupted him. You have 15 minutes, he said finally. The surgical codes are written on a whiteboard in the main laboratory. Input them exactly as written, or the automated systems will complete the procedure. Lieutenant Chen spoke into her radio. Send medical personnel to the basement facility immediately. We have a surgical emergency in progress. I started toward the door, but Cole's voice stopped me. Joel, when you see what we've accomplished down there, when you understand the medical breakthroughs we've achieved, remember that sometimes progress requires sacrifice. I turned back to look at him. The only thing I'll remember is that you turned human beings into laboratory animals. As I ran toward the basement facility with 2 investigators flanking me, I thought about Emily lying unconscious on a surgical table, about Adam strapped to an examination chair with his mind surgically altered, about the 17 inmates who'd been processed through Cole's operation. The elevator to the basement level seemed to take forever. When the doors finally opened, I could hear the hum of medical equipment, the beeping of monitors, the whisper of ventilation systems maintaining sterile conditions for ongoing procedures. We found Emily in the 3rd room we checked. She was unconscious, strapped to a surgical table with her head immobilized in a metal frame. An IV line ran to her arm, and monitoring equipment tracked her vital signs. But most terrifying was the surgical marking on her scalp. Precise lines drawn in blue ink, showing where incisions would be made. A whiteboard on the wall showed a series of codes and medical procedures. The automated surgical system was waiting for input, its robotic arms positioned above Emily's head like mechanical vultures. I rushed to the control panel and began inputting the codes exactly as written on the whiteboard. With each entry, systems powered down, robotic arms retracted, and the immediate threat to Emily's life diminished. But as the investigators began documenting the evidence around us, I realized that saving Emily was just the beginning. The basement facility contained horrors that would take months to fully catalog and understand. And somewhere in this sterile nightmare, Adam Mercer was still strapped to a table, his mind surgically altered beyond repair. Justice had arrived at Millfield Correctional, but for some victims it had come too late. Emily was alive, but barely conscious when the paramedics wheeled her out of the basement facility. The sedatives they'd given her would wear off, but the psychological trauma of waking up strapped to a surgical table would take much longer to heal. As they loaded her into the ambulance, she managed to grip my hand and whisper, "Did you find Adam?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth, that we'd found Adam, but not the man she remembered. The person we'd discovered was alive, but fundamentally broken, his capacity for independent thought surgically removed. He would need care for the rest of his life, but he would never again be the man who'd fallen in love with Emily Carver. The state investigators had arrested Cole and his security team, but as I watched them being led away in handcuffs, I realized the victory felt hollow. We'd stopped the operation at Millfield, but Cole's final words haunted me. "This is bigger than one facility, Joel. We were just a pilot program." Lieutenant Chen approached me as I stood in the prison's main corridor, watching technicians catalog evidence from the basement laboratory. "Officer Radcliffe, we're going to need extensive testimony from you. This investigation is going to expand far beyond Millfield." "How far?" "We found correspondence indicating similar operations in at least 4 other state facilities." Cole wasn't lying. This was a pilot program for a much larger network. The weight of that revelation settled on my shoulders like concrete. 17 victims at Millfield were just the beginning. Across the state, hundreds of inmates and guards might have been processed through illegal medical research programs. "There's something else," Chen continued. "We found financial records showing payments to Cole's operation from a company called Neurological Research Solutions. They're a subsidiary of a major pharmaceutical corporation." "Meaning what?" "Meaning this goes all the way to corporate boardrooms. The people funding this research aren't back-alley criminals. They're executives in suits who saw an opportunity to accelerate drug trials using unwilling subjects." I thought about the clinical efficiency of the basement facility, the sophisticated equipment, the professional medical procedures. This wasn't the work of a few corrupt guards making side money. This was systematic human experimentation funded by legitimate businesses and hidden within the corrections system. "What happens to the victims?" Chen's expression grew grim. "The ones who survived will receive medical care and compensation. But victims like Adam Mercer, the brain damage is irreversible. They'll need institutional care for the rest of their lives. And the inmates? The ones still alive will be transferred to medical facilities for evaluation. Many of them have families who thought they were dead. We'll be making some very difficult phone calls." As we talked, my phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Saw the news. Are you okay? Coming home now." I realized she'd probably seen reports about the investigation at Millfield, though the full scope wouldn't be public for weeks. She'd be worried, confused, wondering why her husband was at the center of a major criminal investigation instead of preparing for retirement. "Lieutenant, how long before I can go home? You'll need to remain available for testimony, but you're not under arrest. You're a witness, not a suspect." She paused. "Joel, what you did tonight saved lives. If you hadn't triggered that alarm, if you hadn't contacted state oversight, Emily Carver would be dead, and this operation would have continued." But as I walked toward the prison exit, past the crime scene tape and the news vans already gathering, in the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only won a single battle in a much larger war. The basement facility at Millfield was shut down, but somewhere else in another prison, another basement, the research was probably continuing. And until every facility was found, until every executive was arrested, until every victim was accounted for, justice would remain incomplete. The media attention hit like a tsunami. By morning, news vans lined the street outside our house, and reporters shouted questions every time I stepped onto the porch. Officer Radcliffe, how long had the illegal experiments been going on? Did you know other guards were being used as test subjects? What made you investigate the warden's activities? Hannah stood in our kitchen, staring at the morning news coverage while coffee grew cold in her hands. The headline read, "Prison Guard Exposes Human Experimentation Ring." My photograph filled the screen, taken from my personnel file, making me look like either a hero or a criminal depending on your perspective. 11 years, she said quietly. 11 years you worked there? And this was happening the whole time? Not the whole time. 8 months, according to the evidence. 8 months. She set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. Joel, they could have killed you. They were planning to kill you. I reached for her, but she stepped away. Not angry, just overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we'd discovered. The retirement we'd planned, the quiet life in Arizona, all of it felt impossibly naive now. The FBI wants me to testify before a grand jury, I said. This investigation is going federal. How long? Months, maybe years. They've found evidence of similar operations in 12 states. Hannah sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of our new reality settling around us like smoke. The house in Tucson? We'll have to postpone. I can't leave the state while the investigation is ongoing. She nodded, but I could see the dreams of escape dying in her eyes. We'd saved money for 15 years to buy that house with the garden. To start fresh somewhere, the walls weren't made of concrete and steel. Now we were trapped in Illinois, bound to this story, committed to seeing justice served no matter how long it took. There's something else, I said. The pharmaceutical company that funded Cole's operation. They've hired a law firm to discredit my testimony. They're claiming I'm mentally unstable, that I fabricated evidence to cover up my own corruption. That's insane. You expose them. They have resources, Hannah. Teams of lawyers, private investigators, public relations firms. They're going to try to destroy my credibility before I can testify. The phone rang. Lieutenant Chen, calling with an update I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Joel, we found something in Cole's personal files. A list of potential future targets for the research program. Your name was on it, but so were 12 other guards across the state. We think they were planning to expand operations significantly. How significantly? Industrial scale. The pharmaceutical company was prepared to invest $50 million in expanding the program to 30 facilities. They projected processing over 1,000 subjects annually. The number hit me like a physical blow. 1,000 people every year, turned into experimental subjects. Guards, inmates, anyone who met their criteria or posed a threat to their operation. There's more. We've been in contact with families of some of the missing guards. They're forming a support group, and they want to meet with you. After I hung up, I found Hannah packing boxes in our bedroom. Not the excited packing we'd been doing for our move to Arizona, but the methodical packing of someone preparing for a long siege. What are you doing? Putting away anything that connects us to our old life. Photo albums, mementos, anything that makes us look like normal people. She held up our wedding photo. Joel, we're not normal people anymore. We're the couple that exposed a conspiracy. We're going to be defined by this for the rest of our lives. She was right. Whether we wanted it or not, we'd become public figures in a story that would unfold over years of trials, appeals, and investigations. The quiet retirement we'd planned was gone, replaced by depositions, testimonies, and the constant threat of retaliation from people with enough money to make problems disappear. Do you regret it? I asked. Do you wish I'd taken Cole's money and stayed quiet? Hannah looked at me for a long moment, holding our wedding photo like a fragile thing that might break. No, but I grieve for the life we're not going to have, the garden I'm not going to plant, the peace we're not going to find. She set the photo in the box and closed the lid. But I'm proud of you, Joel. Terrified for us, but proud of what you did. Outside, another news van pulled up to our curb. Inside, our phones started ringing with interview requests, legal consultations, and death threats that the FBI would later trace to corporate security firms. Our old life was over. The question now was what kind of life we could build from the ashes of justice served and secrets exposed. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse in Chicago, surrounded by mahogany paneling and the weight of American justice. The grand jury proceedings had led to federal indictments against 17 defendants, including Cole, 3 pharmaceutical executives, and a network of corrupt officials across multiple states. My testimony had lasted 3 days. Hour after hour of questions, cross-examinations, and attempts by defense attorneys to portray me as a disgruntled employee seeking attention. They'd brought up every minor disciplinary action from my 11 years at Millfield, every sick day I'd taken, every evaluation that was less than perfect, but they couldn't explain away the evidence. The video recordings, the financial documents, the medical files, all of it painted a picture of systematic human experimentation that horrified even seasoned federal prosecutors. Mr. Radcliffe, the lead prosecutor asked, "In your opinion, how many victims were processed through the Millfield facility?" Based on the medical records we recovered, at least 27 people underwent unauthorized surgical procedures. 17 inmates and 10 staff members, including guards and medical personnel who asked too many questions, and their current condition. I looked toward the gallery where Emily sat with Adam's sister. Adam himself was in a care facility, his mind permanently altered but his body healthy. He would live for decades, but he would never again be the man who'd investigated Cole's operation. Some have recovered. Others will require lifelong care. And 3 victims died from surgical complications that were covered up as natural deaths. The defense attorney, a sharp-dressed woman representing the pharmaceutical company, stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Radcliffe, isn't it true that you were scheduled for disciplinary action regarding excessive use of force prior to these alleged discoveries?" "No, that's not true." "Didn't you have a history of paranoid behavior regarding prison security?" "I had a history of taking security seriously." "Isn't it possible that your allegations stem from a desire to avoid consequences for your own misconduct?" Looked directly at the jury. "Ma'am, I found a basement facility where human beings were being subjected to brain surgery without their consent. I found financial records showing payments for experimental subjects. I found inmates and guards whose minds had been surgically altered to ensure compliance. None of that can be explained by personal misconduct." The trial continued for weeks. Witnesses testified about the conditions in the basement facility, the medical procedures performed without consent, the cover-up that reached into corporate boardrooms and state government offices. Cole himself took the stand, trying to portray the operation as legitimate medical research conducted with proper oversight. But when prosecutors played the video I'd recorded of Adam strapped to a surgical table, the courtroom fell into stunned silence. "That man," the prosecutor said, "was a corrections officer investigating suspicious activities. He was sedated, surgically altered, and turned into a permanent test subject. This is what the defendants call legitimate research." The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the verdicts came like hammer blows. Guilty on all counts of conspiracy, human trafficking, aggravated assault, and violation of civil rights under color of authority. Cole received life in prison without possibility of parole. The pharmaceutical executives got 25 years each. The network of corrupt officials throughout the state correction system would spend the next decade in federal prison. But as I walked out of the courthouse with Hannah, past the reporters and protesters and victims' families, I felt no sense of victory. Justice had been served, but the cost had been enormous. Emily had recovered physically, but she'd never returned to corrections work. Adam would spend the rest of his life in a care facility, his personality and memories intact, but his ability to form new thoughts permanently damaged. The 17 inmates who'd survived were receiving compensation and medical care, but their families had to reconcile with the fact that their loved ones had been used as laboratory animals. "Is it over?" Hannah asked as we reached our car. "Thus, trial is over, but they found evidence of similar operations in other states. There will be more investigations, more trials, more testimony." She nodded, accepting what our life had become. We'd sold the house in Illinois and bought a smaller place in Iowa, close enough to Chicago for court appearances, but far enough away to have some privacy. The garden Hannah had dreamed of planting in Arizona was now a reality in our backyard, in Des Moines, though it had taken months of therapy for her to find joy in simple things again. "Joel," she said as we drove away from the courthouse, "do you think it was worth it?" I thought about Adam in his care facility, about the families who'd gotten closure, about the future victims who would never experience what had happened at Millfield. "Yes," I said, "but the price was higher than I ever imagined." That night I called Emily to let her know about the verdicts. She cried when I told her about Cole's life sentence, not from joy, but from relief that it was finally over. "Have you been to see Adam?" I asked. "Every week. He recognizes me now, but he can't remember why I'm important to him. The doctors say his emotional memories were damaged during the surgery. I'm sorry, Emily. Don't be. He's alive and Cole is in prison. That's more justice than I expected 6 months ago. After I hung up, I sat in our Iowa garden, watching Hannah tend to the flowers she'd planted in soil that had never been contaminated by concrete and steel. The quiet was profound, broken only by wind through the trees and the distant sound of traffic on a highway that led to places we'd never been. But even in this peaceful place, I knew that somewhere else, in another facility, other victims might be suffering in silence. The network we'd exposed had been vast, and justice moved slowly. The fight would continue, even if our part in it was finished. 3 years later, I stood before a congressional subcommittee in Washington, D.C., delivering testimony that would become part of the official record on prison reform and medical ethics. The hearing room was packed with representatives, advocates, survivors, and family members of victims from facilities across 12 states. Mr. Radcliffe, the committee chairman asked, based on your experience and the subsequent federal investigation, what reforms do you believe are necessary to prevent similar operations in the future? I looked out at the assembled crowd, recognizing faces from the long journey that had brought us here. Emily sat in the front row, now working as an advocate for corrections reform. Next to her sat Adam's sister, who had become his legal guardian, and a powerful voice for victims' rights. Congressman, the fundamental issue is oversight. Correctional facilities operate with minimal external supervision, creating environments where abuse can flourish unchecked. We need independent monitoring, mandatory reporting of unusual medical procedures, and criminal penalties for officials who cover up human rights violations. What about the role of private corporations in corrections? Any company conducting research or providing services in correctional facilities should be subject to the same ethical standards as university research programs. Informed consent, institutional review boards, external oversight, all of it should be mandatory. The questioning continued for hours, covering everything from financial accountability to victim compensation. But the most difficult moment came when they asked about personal cost. Mr. Radcliffe, some critics have argued that your actions destabilized the correction system and endangered public safety by exposing security vulnerabilities. How do you respond to that criticism? I thought carefully before answering. Congressman, the security of a correctional facility cannot be built on a foundation of human rights violations. A system that permits torture and experimentation is fundamentally insecure because it depends on silence and complicity rather than accountability and transparency. Do you have any regrets about your decision to expose the Millfield operation? The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought about Adam in his care facility, still unable to form new memories but somehow managing to smile when Emily visited. I thought about Hannah, who'd found peace in our Iowa garden, but still woke up sometimes from nightmares about what could have happened to us. I thought about the 17 inmates whose families had finally learned the truth about their disappearances, even though that truth was more horrible than they'd imagined. No, Congressman. I regret that it took 11 years for someone to notice what was happening. I regret that victims suffered while the rest of us went about our daily routines. But I don't regret exposing a system that treated human beings as laboratory animals. The hearing concluded with recommendations for legislative action, funding for victim services, and oversight mechanisms for correctional facilities. Whether Congress would act on those recommendations remained to be seen. But at least the conversation was happening in public, recorded for history, impossible to ignore or cover up. After the hearing, Hannah and I walked through the Capitol building, past portraits of lawmakers who'd grappled with questions of justice and human dignity in their own times. The marble halls echoed with footsteps and voices, the sound of democracy slowly, imperfectly working towards something better. Do you think anything will change? Hannah asked. Some things already have. The victims are getting compensation. Families have answers. The people responsible are in prison. But will it prevent the next time? That was the question that haunted me. We'd exposed one network, prosecuted the perpetrators, reformed policies at multiple levels of government. But human nature hadn't changed. The temptation to abuse power, to cut corners in the name of progress, to treat vulnerable people as expendable, all of that remained. Maybe not entirely, I admitted. But we've made it harder. We've shown that secrets can be exposed, that justice is possible, that ordinary people can stand up to institutional corruption. We took the train back to Iowa that evening, watching the American landscape roll past the windows as we traveled from the corridors of power back to our quiet life in Des Moines. Hannah had her garden now, rows of vegetables and flowers that she tended with the same care she'd once devoted to planning our escape from Illinois. I had my work with victims' advocacy groups, testifying at trials, consulting on prison reform, initiatives. It wasn't the retirement we'd planned, but it was meaningful work that grew directly from the worst experience of our lives. That night, as we sat on our back porch listening to crickets and watching stars appear in the Iowa sky, Hannah took my hand and squeezed it gently. "I'm proud of what we did," she said, terrified by what we went through, but proud of how it ended. Even though we never made it to Arizona? Even though. She smiled, the first truly peaceful smile I'd seen from her in 3 years. We found something better than escape, Joel. We found purpose. As the stars grew brighter in the darkness above us, I thought about all the people who'd played a role in this story. Cole in his federal prison cell, still believing he'd been conducting legitimate research. Emily finding new ways to help victims of institutional abuse. Adam in his care facility, damaged but alive, surrounded by people who loved him despite what had been taken from him. And I thought about the future victims who would never experience what happened at Millfield, because enough people had been willing to speak up, to fight back, to refuse the comfortable silence of complicity. Justice isn't always swift, and it's rarely complete, but sometimes, in the darkness of the worst human institutions, ordinary people find the courage to turn on the lights. Sometimes that's enough.